So I want to dive into how cryptocurrency plays into all of this. So for me, and I imagine for you, the most important thing about cryptocurrency from a civil liberties perspective is that it can take the anonymity of cash and import it into the online world. And I have been very alarmed in the last year that governments have been increasingly pushing to extend the mass surveillance of the traditional banking system onto cryptocurrency. So, for example, the travel rule or the DOJ's crypto enforcement framework or the FinCEN and FATF proposals. And we've seen exchanges mysteriously delisting privacy coins as well. And what are your thoughts on that, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. It all comes back to that fundamental concept that surveillance has become easier. The barriers to performing surveillance at scale have evolved with the advance in technology. We actually still believe things like the idea that cash is anonymous, and that's no longer actually true. Fun little exercise for anybody at home who's doing this. Those cash counters that you see at like the bank, they can put like a stack of money in, it's like, and it pulls it through and it says, these are, of these bills, or these are 30 of these bills, or whatever. Like, you can sort it into all kinds of things. If you make a deposit, if you ever actually go into a bank anymore, which in a lot of you don't. But maybe, you're a drug dealer, go buy your own cash counter. Those cash counters now, they actually scan the serial number of every bill. And they keep a database of every serial of every bill that they scan, even when they're going by, like, 130 seconds. And guess what those cash counters are now? Yeah, they're networked, right? And so this is the thing. The same thing is happening to our postal mail. The USPS in the United States, they photograph addressing information for every piece of mail now they process. And these are just the challenges that we face, right? They see it as metadata. Like, maybe they don't know what you spent that money on, but they know that that cash was deposited by this person at this bank, eventually, this business. And the last time that the system writ large saw this bill was over in this state or that, and it was withdrawn by this person at that time. And we have no idea how the federal government is using these programs. We have no idea how the banks are using these programs to perform sort of surveillance and link analysis of how sort of financial flows occur. But then, as you say, then we get cryptocurrency. Now, cryptocurrency, and by this, I'm just going to say Bitcoin, is really failing comprehensively, terribly on the privacy angle. And I've said this again, and people are like, oh, Taproot, look at what Taproot actually does. Taproot does not fix Bitcoin's privacy problem. And there's some arguments that it makes it worse by this sort of fragmented address space, making a forensic sort of flow analysis easier, because you can, this kind of wallet is using an ancient address. They sent a payment to this new person with a new form of address, right? But the change address went back to the old one. So even though there's one input, two outputs, you can tell one was a payment and one was a sort of a refund or a change event. Shouldn't be like that. There's no reason for it to happen. We see so many different privacy clones. Zcash, I have said repeatedly, really does the best in this space with their shielded transactions. The criticism is that, like, these transactions don't occur by default, which is valid. In my opinion, they should happen by default. There are other cryptocurrencies like Monero, privacy code, which is having a lot of trouble being listed on exchanges broadly, which has sort of privacy by default, but it's a lower measure of privacy. They're just playing a shell game. And those shell games really don't last forever, particularly as technology does better and better. And we haven't seen legally tested in the kind of way that we want to see it done. But they're both great projects. And there are many, many other privacy coins out there. But like you said, we see exchanges starting to go, privacy, that's scary. The way that you fix this, the way that you normalize this, is you make Bitcoin private, right? And I mean the main chain. I'm not talking about putting a layer 2. I'm not saying lightning shenanigans, right? You have to make the idea cryptocurrency is private by design. And once you normalize that, it's fait accompli. And it's really frustrating, I think, for a lot of people in the space that the core development team for Bitcoin has not prioritized this, because the longer they wait, the more obstacles are going to be put in place to prevent that from being the case. Right now, Bitcoin really can't be delisted by exchanges. And the sooner we take advantage of that, the better off we will be.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find so frustrating about working on policy around financial surveillance is that somehow everyone seems to just accept that the financial surveillance of the traditional banking system is totally normal, that it's necessary that banks turn over financial records to the government by default en masse.
And this was never the norm historically. A lot of this flew out of like September 11th with like counterterrorism financing, and like counterterrorism financing at like Bank of America. Like, we want terrorists to be sending financial flows over Bank of America, because then we know what they're doing. We know who it's going to. We can knock on their door and like we can blow up their house, right? The way we deal with these things is really crazy, because we structured these new policies in the panic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there, but I think it's important. Actually, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that. When did these things just start to change from this old paradigm? Things were in terms of what the government could get from banks and what they can get in.
So, back one of the original cases around this type of financial surveillance was the Miller case back in the 1970s, where the Supreme Court looked at bank records under the Bank Secrecy Act, because this is all happening under the Bank Secrecy Act, and the way that was being collected, and said, well, look, since you're giving a third party, the bank, your financial data, they can turn that over. You don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that. So
because you don't own it, the bank owns it, right? It's no longer your record; it's the bank's record. So the government doesn't need a warrant or anything like that, because the bank can voluntarily provide it. That's what you're saying, right?
Right, exactly, because you've shown it to the bank. Suddenly, you don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy in it. And of course, in the 1970s, you can understand where the third party doctrine came from, because the amount of information that you were showing to someone was minimal, right? Like the checks you're writing.
Your library card.
Right, exactly. And then you fast forward to today, and I actually think that if you brought this to the Supreme Court again, this would come out very differently, because we've seen in the last few years the Supreme Court chipping away at the third party doctrine and recognizing that today, if you have the same, if you have someone's financial records, the things that they're showing to third parties, it's a comprehensive picture of absolutely everything that they do, right? Their whole lives. And so I think this would turn out differently if it went up to the court today. But the thing that I find so weird here is that even cryptocurrency advocates will say, in responding to proposed regulations, things like, as long as you're just regulating cryptocurrency the same way as you're regulating traditional financial institutions, as long as the information that's being handed over about crypto transactions is the same, then that's okay. These are like well-known cryptocurrency advocates. And it's like there's this stigma that if you support allowing financial transactions to be anonymous, you support money laundering and terrorism,
Yeah, I think it's strategic. I think if you asked a lot of these people privately, they would all say they hate it. They would all say it's a mistake. They would all say they don't do it. But at the same time, I think a lot of these guys are not comfortable being the first to break cover. And they're afraid of regulation, right? The problem with the cryptocurrency space at the largest scale today is the people who make these decisions have the biggest stake in the system. And the system has benefited from the fact that it has not been regulated out of existence, or there's no attempt to regulate that out of existence currently by the structure as it exists today. And so they have become fantastically wealthy. And this puts a lot on the line, right? I'm not saying they have no principles. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm saying they realize how much value there is both for themselves and for everybody else who's bought into these systems by not rocking them. And it's important to remember that sometimes the boat can be bigger than the puddle. And right now, they're all afraid of being, capsized and drowned in the ocean. But there is, like right now, they're in a puddle and there's a rainstorm out there. And the puddle's getting bigger.